My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today we're going to talk about, can society help reduce the risk of complex post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms? And also, can society reduce the risk of mood disorders in children? Now, we've talked about this in multiple shows, that the caregivers and the parents are obviously going to be the most important in doing this. However, we can't forget that caregivers and parents do come from a larger society, and it definitely affects the caregivers. So we need to take a look at that. I also think that there are many ways that society can help reduce the risk of trauma in its citizens. The evidence will show that if we look at people from Europe compared to people in the United States, it offers us some very interesting things to look at, such as if you're a child in the United States, you're twice as likely to have C-PTSD symptoms as you are in Europe. And it also shows that you're twice as likely to be diagnosed with some type of mood disorder compared to a child in Europe. Now, one could say, what about the stigma of mental health? Maybe they just don't diagnose things in Europe. But that would be false, because they're more liberal in Europe, so they're more likely to diagnose there. But what happens is that there's obviously some things in society that we need to look at that cause more trauma. Now, in Europe, they have a better social safety net. So that's one of the issues. Also, since 1973, in the United States, wages have not increased with the cost of living. So that creates a lot of poverty. It creates negative socioeconomic situations for people. What does that do? It creates incredible anxiety for parents, which of course is contagious to the children. So that creates a lot of trauma. So we even see it in the news. And again, if this sounds too political for people, I can buy into that, I guess. But then again, on the other side, I can't. Because you can't separate politics from psychology. It's just part of it. So again, like if you look at current news, and it says that, I think Biden said he's going to take away or forgive $10,000 to $20,000 of student debt. Do you think that that would increase or decrease the trauma in the United States? Obvious answer, right? It's going to decrease it a little bit. So again, there's a lot of things that are in our society that can decrease the trauma overall. So let's take a look at some other things here. Now, the proper development of a child, it should help them to answer these questions. Not that they're going to know the answers fully, but they should have an idea to be able to answer these next 5 questions. And if they can't, it means that they're going to be very susceptible to PTSD. So one of the things I really want to look at today is not only can society reduce the risk of PTSD, but also can help, in a sense, treat it. So here are the 5 questions. And again, if a child can't answer these questions, there's something wrong with their caregivers, and there's something wrong going on in society. Number 1, can I trust the world? Number 2, can I be me and handle problems on my own? Number 3, can I safely take initiative, achieve goals, try new things, and prepare for leadership roles? Number 4, am I competent and can I reasonably contribute to the world? And number 5, what are my talents and what will I do with them? Again, if we have a good society, we can help people move in this direction. So again, as something that would help a child who comes from, let's say, a poor environment. Let's say they come from a situation where they have caregivers that are not very loving and very supportive. Do we just throw them away? No, of course not. Because evidence tells us that all it takes sometimes is one good role model or something that gives this child meaning and purpose in life. And society can handle that part, or at least help mitigate the damage that their families may cause. So let's work on this. I have about 6 of them that society can do. So number 1, we need to be able to teach active coping styles. So active coping styles, they're correlated to post-traumatic growth, correlated to resilience, correlated to success. Now, what does active coping styles look like? It looks very solution focused, where the child, even at a very young age, would ask the questions, how can I fix this? How can I improve this? In other words, not just sit around and cry and wait for somebody else to take care of it, or feel hopeless, right, or helpless. They want to, at a very young age, we should be able to instill in them what is under their control. And you will see this in young children. They try to push boundaries. They want to know what's under their control and what's not. We have to expand their horizons in this area. So what else does active coping styles look like? It's emotion focused. In other words, they're allowed to express emotions. They're allowed to feel emotions. They should be able to accept their emotions and to be able to cope with them and understand why they have those emotions. They should be able to look at those stressors. Again, it's very important to look at these things straight on. Instead, we seem to have a society that says, move on, there's nothing to see here. Or we have caregivers that don't want their children to feel anything because they somehow think it's a problem with the caregivers, right? And they don't want to explain things to their children, that having feelings and emotions is okay. But what has to follow behind that is we still have to take action on things. So what do passive coping styles look like? Well, first of all, let's go with they're correlated to utter and complete failure, correlated to denial. And we see this a lot in our society today. Correlated to mood disorders, people who avoid things, correlated to taking no responsibility, blaming other people, substance abuse, owning their helplessness, owning their victimhood. But here's the thing, and I see this constantly. Why am I saying this? Is because, again, our society has fallen into this trap where you see blaming and avoiding and not taking responsibility. And if you lose, you say you didn't lose. You know, somebody's screwing you over. Kids see this. It's contagious. People not taking responsibility is completely contagious. They see it and then they learn it. Like when I went to school, again, you're gonna sound like a boomer, right? I'm Generation X, by the way. But it doesn't matter what generation you come from. Being decent is being decent. Having virtues is having virtues. Constantly, you will see parents not want to take responsibility. And if their child gets in trouble in school, they march right down to the school or text them because they don't want to take the time, and they want to badmouth the teacher. And they let the kid off the hook. What's going on here? You're telling the kid not to have responsibility, and you're just throwing away all authority. It's okay to question authority, but to throw it away and act like some little kid has more power and more intelligence than than teachers in the school system that have been educated for years and working on their craft for years. They don't know anything, but a little child does. So again, we need to work on personal responsibility. And as parents, I think we're really dropping the ball in this area. It's very important to talk about people who avoid their fears. I see this all the time, but here's the problem. Avoiding fears is a symptom of PTSD. Therefore, avoiding fears can't be the solution. So when we talk about society, what can we do to reduce the risk of C-PTSD? One of the things is we have to have kids face their fears. I see this time and time again. I try to do therapy with these kids and I go, hey, how was gym class today? And they go, well, they were playing basketball and I opted out. Opted out? Why would you opt out? Well, I don't want to miss the basket and look bad in front of people. That's a fear. So they allow the kid to sit out. And of course, that's going to get dug into their psyche. And now every time that they have a fear, they're just going to opt out and not do anything. Like, what are we teaching here? We're teaching kids to have PTSD all the time. It makes no sense. It's a passive coping style. Continuous avoiding of fear instead of mindful exposure to the fear continues the trauma, and it makes the trauma part of the individual's identity. So they own that now. And so now they're a professional victim. They're a professionally helpless person that looks for everybody else to solve their problems. Again, as a society, we should get back to when somebody falls off the horse, literally or figuratively, you get back on as quick as possible. That's the answer. That's what's supposed to be done as a good parent. And if we start doing that as parents and we start understanding that as a society we need to get a little tougher, again, we can inoculate or vaccinate, in a sense, kids against having PTSD. It's not saying that traumas don't happen, because unfortunately they happen all the time. But maybe we can help kids be a little bit more resistant to traumatic experiences if we don't coddle them to death all the time. Let's talk about another way that society can help kids inoculate themselves or reduce the risk to potential PTSD or mood disorders as they get older. And I would say physical exercise. It's extremely important. Why? It builds physical strength. It builds emotional strength. It builds the foundation for commitment, for dedication, for being able to accept a challenge, to want the challenge, to look forward to challenges. Learning to work hard and not trying to seek comfort. I see this all the time from young kids I try to do therapy on. They're so allergic to a challenge. They're so allergic to breaking a sweat. They're so allergic to doing anything that might create a little spike in anxiety. And by the way, every living thing has anxiety. Notice I said living. The only thing that doesn't have anxiety in this world, they're dead. So this thought that we want these kids to be raised like veal, stuck in a position and never do anything, you're causing so much more damage than you are good. Physical activity. It improves the ability to manage stress, improves the ability to learn. It increases the plasticity of the brain. It increases the adaptation to stressful situations and improves the neurochemicals in the brain better than drugs. Let me repeat that again. Any type of physical activity, only even studies have shown 30 minutes at a time, 3 times a week, works better than drugs. Now, why am I saying this here? Why is this a societal problem? Because our society has downgraded physical exercise into that it's not required. It's not a big deal. Half the kids I see today, with their posture, their low self-esteem, the fact that most of them are obese, I see 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids looking like they're 65 years old. How is this possible? It's because as a society, we don't value this anymore. We make physical activity optional in a lot of schools. It shouldn't be optional. It works better than drugs. And drugs don't even give you self-esteem. So again, as a society, we can't have gym class be optional. And even if they do have gym class, you can still opt out of doing certain sports and sit on the sidelines. Like, what's going on here? Like, I don't understand this. Every part of psychology, I don't care if you're a therapist, social worker, psychiatrist, it doesn't matter. What we all seem to agree on with raising a competent child is two things: love and discipline. And if we knock out physical exercise and we don't want them to have accountability, we're knocking out the discipline. So we're already throwing that out as a society. Maybe we should listen to the therapist, maybe, right? And what about the love part? You know, love is about nurturing the growth of a child. Are you, as an individual or in society, are we nurturing a child when we don't hold them up to a standard? Every time they have a feeling, we let them sit down, we let them opt out, we say that they don't need to do physical exercise. Are we really loving them? I would question that. Let's look at number 3, a positive outlook. People who are vulnerable and remain in traumatized states generally have a negative outlook on life. Now, you could say that something bad happened to them and that's why they have a negative outlook. That's true, that happens. But you know what else happens? People who are not taught to be grateful, people who only look at negatives because their parents and our society is so negative now, kids get like that, and all they do is complain and whine and cry about things, they're much more susceptible to trauma. Because when something happens, they only look at the bad. They don't look at the good. They don't look at the solution behind it. They don't look at the way to grow. They don't look at the post-traumatic growth. They don't look at the super compensation that can happen from something negative happening. Can we blame the kids? I don't think so. They're not born like that. They were taught that from their parents and our society. Positive people have a broader focus of life. Like I said on a previous show, the more traumatized you are, the more narrow-minded you get, the less you're open to new opportunities and other ways of thinking. So again, we want to have a positive outlook because we start to look for different ways to improve ourselves. It's extremely important. People who have a positive outlook on life, they're resistant to depression. They're also resistant to long-term emotional dysregulation. Listen, we all get emotionally dysregulated at some point. But if you have a positive outlook on life, you're not going to live there. You'll walk through it, but you're not going to live there. Also, people with a positive outlook on life, they tend to be able to get more social support. Why? Because we all have bad things that happen to us. But if we try to face it straight up in the most positive way we can, which is really the only way to do it, by the way, people support us. But if you're going to be an emotional vampire to everybody you see all the time, there's going to be some people that have codependency issues that are going to sit there and go, I can fix you. But eventually they're going to tire and bore of you as well because you take too much. And so, again, social support is extremely important in order to, again, inoculate you against C-PTSD. But you're not going to have that if you have an extremely negative outlook on life. Let's look at meaning and purpose, which might be the most important thing that all living things need. Now, living up to a standard, having requirements, it's important. As the Buddha said, life is suffering. That's true. There is a lot of suffering in the world. But how do you rise above that? Well, Viktor Frankl talked about that, and he said, if you have suffering, but you give meaning behind your suffering, you turn it into human achievement. Now, if you have a lot of negative situations going on in your life, maybe you come from poverty. Maybe it's going to be really difficult. Maybe you got 3, 4 kids, and you're like, well, how can I go back to school? Yeah, life's tough. Life is suffering. But Nietzsche said, if you have a strong enough why to do something and you really want to do it, the how doesn't matter. You'll figure it out. But as a society, we have to talk like this. We have to put it in the minds of children when they're very young. They're lost when you start talking to them about meaning and purpose when they're 21, 22 years old. Your personality is formed by the time you're 6. if they don't understand that they need to grab the world by the throat when they need to, even if their parents suck, because there are good things in life, which is what education is, right? You expose children to things. They might have the worst parents in the world, but if they fall in love with their guitar, if they fall in love with theater, if they fall in love with mathematics, whatever it might be, woodwork, whatever, they can rise above what they have. I think it was Aristotle who said, listen, if you don't have a good role model in your family, pick one. It's a big world out there. But as a society, we have to be able to expose children to this big world. And I have this feeling, well, it's not a feeling, it's factual, that we're not doing it anymore. And that's a major problem. Peter Townsend, again, right here, up there, the greatest writer who ever lived, spoke about this a little bit in terms of meaning and purpose. And he said, how can those who have never seen the light be enlightened? Again, that's interesting. It's hard to enlighten a human being that's never seen a glimpse of the light. And how do we do this? As a society, again, we have to put it out there for people. So society does have to take an active role in trying to decrease the amount of trauma of its citizens. I believe that wholeheartedly. Let's move on. Social support. Social support, we talked about it a little bit before. It correlates to an increase in resilience, increase in self-worth. It decreases your loneliness. Lack of social support is correlated to depression, risky behavior, and suicide. Now, again, in our society, are we pushing social support? The answer is no, right? Like these kids, they're going to have neck problems by the time they're 15 years old. They all have their heads down like this in their phones. They're not looking at the people in front of them. They're not having conversations like they did. More and more, we're seeing more narcissism, more inability to speak to people. You get these kids that are obviously going through adolescence. These boys are scared to death to talk to girls. What's going on here? It's because their ability to socially connect is going down. And what does that do? It makes them ripe for C-PTSD and mood disorders. So again, the show today, how do we reduce the risk of this happening? We need to enhance or give the child the ability and put them in positions where they need to interact socially. Why these kids are allowed to walk around schools all day long on their phones, I'll never know. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. No way. Let's continue. Cognitive flexibility. The ability to reframe negative situations, to look at the bright side, to look at the silver lining. Look for solutions, look for opportunities. In other words, have control over your prefrontal cortex. Now, if you have control over your prefrontal cortex, which is logic and reasoning, what will happen is you will have control over your stress responses. Are we seeing this with kids these days? No. Because what we're seeing is a massive increase in depression, massive increase in anxiety, suicidal ideations, suicides themselves. And a lot of them are just basically opting out of society because they're too afraid to talk to people. I can't tell you how many young people I've talked to that I would say, hey, are you interested in this? Or whatever it might be. The answer is usually, oh, no, that's boring. Which is a nice way of trying to say that something else is the problem. When inside they know they're the problem. You know, I'll hear this all the time, like, hey, you want to try to learn how to play guitar? Oh, I'm not good at it. You're not good at it. You've never tried it. Well, unless I'm really good at it, I don't want to do it. Okay, well, we're in this circular issue here, right? And it's because in the first 5 questions that I asked you in the beginning, right, Children do not feel competent because they're not given the chance to fail when they're young. And if we don't do that as a society, we're going to have these people get older and they're going to be afraid to take any chances or any risks or try anything new. And that's what's happening, that they literally are frozen to death. Toxic passivity, they're afraid to do anything because they have no self-esteem. Continuing. So just a couple of thoughts I had. I want to read this one thing because I can't do a better job than what this guy did. And so some of the things that should be in school that are not, and we should be teaching this stuff. What about art class? That's become optional. Why is that optional? It should not be. Music class now, not there or optional. That shouldn't happen. Home economics, shop classes, woodwork, metal shop, all these things. Listen, these are actually really good skills to have. Any person should have. Or you can actually make a really good living as a welder or as a carpenter. Why don't we do this anymore? Again, it's about meaning and purpose. If you don't put this in front of children at a young age, when they get older, what do you think? They're going to start getting into woodwork and carpentry and stuff when they're like 25? That's not going to happen. I talked to a good friend a couple of months ago, and it was really amazing. I was on the phone with him, and he was showing me pictures. Like, he actually built like 3 lifts. Like, he actually, it's like this whole thing in his house where his garage, he's got these 3 lifts where he can lift up the cars and work underneath them. I'm like, well, his love for fixing cars started when he was like 8 years old. And then he went, by the time he was in high school, he was an expert at it. And now he just does it for fun. But where do you gain these interests? You don't gain them when you're in your 20s and 30s. We have to start as a society when you're very young. And even if everything falls apart, even if your family sucks, you can still have a love for these other things that you're good at. But if society doesn't offer them, you don't have it, and then again, you increase the risk for people having PTSD. We used to have student enrichment programs, which they do not have in schools anymore, to my knowledge, where local business people would come in and they would be great role models and they would tell you about their business and you would get excited about it. At least I would at some point. Again, excellent role models, where are they? We need them, they're not there anymore. And talking about reframing negative events. Listen, if you don't care about anything in the world, it's hard to reframe things, right? But if you have a love for something, it's easy to reframe things. Such as, I wanted to work out at this gym as a 45-minute bus ride. Like, what a pain in the neck. I can reframe that. It gave me more time to look at my books. You know, it gave me more time to study. You know, so I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So, like Nietzsche said, and I've said this before, if you have a strong enough why to do something, the how doesn't matter. But you have to want to do something. That's important. So again, before the show gets too long, I'm going to read this, and this is about, again, children being able to do age development things, which again, we seem to think that all children they're incapable of doing anything. By the time I was 5 years old, I was walking to school for kindergarten. I'm not special. Most kids did it. Very interesting study. I think it was in England, what they said. In the 1970s and 80s, 86% of children walked to school. Now, it's less than 25%. Somebody reading into that, we're telling kids that they are incapable of having responsibility, that they're incapable of having that time for themselves to be able to talk to their friends along the way. So here's something interesting. This is from George Mammon from the University of Toronto. He says, children who walk to school have been found to have higher academic performance in terms of attention and alertness. Verbal, numeric, and reasoning abilities, higher degree of pleasantness, and lower levels of stress during the school day. and higher levels of happiness, excitement, and relaxation on the journey to school. Walking to school can further foster personal growth by developing a sense of independent decision making, emotional bonds with peers, and the natural environment, and road and traffic safety skills. There's like 1,000 positives there of having your children walk to school, but yet as a society, we're like, you don't do that. Listen, and I don't want to hear somebody saying, but it's so dangerous out there. Listen, the crime rate has been falling hugely since early 1990s. So it's been going down for 30 years. The crime rate in the 70s and 80s was really high when people actually did let their kids do things. And there were latchkey kids, such as myself, that you would walk home from school as well, open up the door to your apartment, and you would do your homework, and you would make dinner. And you had more self-esteem and everything else that goes with it. And of course, we had lower depression. Not only did we have lower anxiety, we didn't even know what anxiety was. Like, it wasn't a word that we used because we just did things. So let's talk about theater real quick. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk talks about this incessantly, about how this is curative of people who have PTSD. But I also think it can be used before to be able to help you so you don't get PTSD. It says, theater respects integrity, imagination, beauty, balance, and humanity. It achieves all this through a construct that is completely imagined. We cannot underestimate the impact of live performance. To be engaged in anything is fundamental to our growth and happiness. To be engaged as an audience member in an experience of theater can help us engage more completely with other aspects of life. Again, part of being traumatized is not being engaged in life. It's to have a very narrow focus. So keep that in mind when he's saying this. Theater is an experience of community. We gather together to watch something about ourselves. Children have valuable educational experiences when they go to plays and concerts and visit art exhibits. It develops children's aesthetic sensibilities, promotes educational objectives, and offers learning opportunities that enhance social awareness and skills. And there's more, but I'll end it there. So I think I've really more than made my point that yes, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it happens in the home, obviously. But there are plenty of things that society can do to mitigate the damage, let's say, that unproductive, neglectful, anxiety-ridden parents may do to their children. So again, plenty of things that society can do. I hope you found today's show to be valuable. My name is Joe Peroni. This is the Rise Above Project. Please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.